He strode away from them from the forest, out of sight. God, this place is going to the dogs, said Malfoy loudly. That oaf teaching class. My father'll have a fit when I tell him. Shut up, Malfoy, Harry repeated. Careful, Potter. There's a Dementor behind you. Ooh, squealed Lavender Brown, pointing towards the opposite side of the padlock. Trotting towards them were a dozen of the most bizarre creatures Harry had ever seen. They had the bodies of hind legs and tails of horses, but the front legs and the wings and head of what seemed to be a giant eagle, with cruel steel-colored beaks and large, brilliantly orange eyes. And the talons on their front legs were half-foot long and deadly-looking. Each of the breasts had a thick leather collar around the neck, which was attached to a long chain at the end of all those that were held to the vast hands of Hagrid, who came jogging into the padlock behind them, the creatures. "Gee up there!" he roared, shaking the chains, urging the creatures toward the fence where the class stood. Everybody drew back slightly as Hagrid reached them and the tethered the creatures to the fence. "Hippogriffs!" Hagrid roared happily, waving his hand at them. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Harry could sort of see what Hagrid meant. Once you got over the first shock of seeing something that was half horse, half bird, you started to appreciate the hippogriffs' gleaming coats, changing smoothly from feather to hair. Which of them was different color? Stormy gray, bronze, pinkish, roan, gleaming chestnut, and inky black. So, said Hagrid, rubbing his hands together and beaming around, if you want to come a bit near, but no one seemed to want to. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, however, approached the fence cautiously. Now, first thing you gotta do, Bar Hippogriffs, is they're proud, said Hagrid. Easily offended, Hippogriffs. Don't ever insult one, 'cause it might be the last thing you do. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle weren't listening. They were talking in an undertone, and Harry had a nasty feeling they were plotting how best to disrupt this lesson. "You always wait for Hippogriff to make the first move," Hagrid continued. "It's polite, you see. You walk towards him, and you bow, and you wait. If he bows back, you're allowed to touch him. If he doesn't bow, then get away from him sharpish, 'cause those talons hurt. Right? Who wants to go first?" Most of the class backed farther away. Even Harry and Ron and Hermione had misgivings. The hippogriffs were tossing their heads and flexing their powerful wings. They didn't seem to be tethered like this. "No one?" And Hagrid with a pleading look. "I'll do it," said Harry. There was an intake of breath from behind him. Both Lavender and Parvati whispered, "Ooh, no. Harry, remember your tea leaves." Harry ignored them. He climbed up over the paddock fence. "Good man, Harry," roared Hagrid. "Right then. Let's see how you get to the Buckbeak." He untied one of their chains and pulled the gray hippogriff away from its fellows and slipped off its leather collar. The class on the other side of the padlock seemed to be holding its breath. Malfoy's eyes were narrowing maliciously. "Easy now, Harry," said Hagrid quietly. "You've got to make eye contact with her. Try not to blink. Hippogriffs don't trust you if you blink too much." Harry's eyes immediately began to water, but he didn't shut them. Buckbeak had turned its great sharp beak and was staring at Harry with one fierce orange eye. "That's it," Hagrid said. "That's Harry. Now bow." Harry didn't feel much like exposing the back of his neck to Buckbeak, but he did as he was told. He gave a short bow and then looked up. Hippogriff was still staring haughtily at him. It didn't move. "Ah," said Hagrid, sounding worried. "Right. Back away now, Harry. Easy does it." But then, to Harry's enormous surprise, the hippogriff suddenly bent its scaly front knees and sank into what was an unmistakable bow. "Well done, Harry," said Hagrid, ecstatic. "Right. You can touch him. Pat his beak. Go on." Feeling that better reward would have been to back away, Harry moved slowly towards the hippogriff and reached toward it. He patted the beak several times, and the hippogriff closed his eyes lazily, as though enjoying it. The class broke into applause, all except Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were looking deeply disappointed. Right then, Harry, said Hagrid. I reckon you might be, if you ride him. This was more than Harry had bargained for. He was used to broomsticks, but he wasn't sure about a hippogriff would be quite the same. You climb up there just behind the wing joint, said Hagrid. And mind you, don't pull any of the feathers out. He won't like that. Harry put his foot on top of the Buckbeak's wing and hoisted himself on his back. Buckbeak stood up. Harry wasn't sure what to hold on to. Everything in front of him was covered with feathers. Go on, then, roared Hagrid, slapping the hippogriff's hindquarters. Without warning, the 12-foot wings flapping on either side of Harry, he just in time to seize the hippogriff around the neck before he was soaring upward. It was nothing like a broomstick, and Harry knew which one he preferred. The hippogriff's wings were beating uncomfortably on either side of him, catching him under his legs and making him feel like he was about to be thrown off. The glossy feathers slipped under his fingers. He didn't dare get a stronger grip. Instead of a smooth action, the Nimbus 2000, he now felt himself rocking backward, forward, and the hindquarters, and the hippogriff rose and fell with its wings. Buckbeak flew him once around the padlock and then headed back to the ground. This was a bit that Harry was dreading. He leaned back and smooth neck lowered, feeling that he was going to be slipped off over the beak. Then Harry felt a heavy thud, and all 4 ill-sorted feet hit the ground, just as he managed to hold on and push himself straight again. Good work, Harry! Roared Hagrid. Everyone except Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle were cheered. Okay, who else wants to go? Emboldened by Harry's success, the rest of the class climbed cautiously into the paddock. Harry untied the hippogriffs one by one, and soon people were bowing nervously all over the padlock. Neville had repeatedly backward from his, which didn't seem to want to be bend his knees. Ron and Hermione practiced on their chestnut while Harry watched. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had taken over Buckbeak. He had bowed to Malfoy, who was now patting his beak, looking disdainful. This is very easy, Malfoy drawled aloud, enough for Harry to hear him. I knew it must have been. If Potter could do it. I bet you're not dangerous at all, are you? He said to the hippogriff. Are you, you great ugly brute? It happened in a flash of steely talons. Malfoy let out a high-pitched scream. The next moment, Hagrid was wrestling Buckbeak back into its collar as he strained to get Malfoy, who lay curled up in the grass, blood blossoming over his robe. I'm dying! Malfoy yelled. The class panicked. I'm dying! Look at me! It killed me! You're not dying, said Hagrid, who had gone very white. Someone help me. You got to get him out of here. Hermione ran to hold open the gate as Hagrid lifted Malfoy easily. As they passed, Harry saw that there were 2 long, deep gashes on Malfoy's arm. Blood spattered the grass, and Hagrid ran with him up the slope to the castle. Very shaken at the care of magical creatures, class followed a walk. The Slytherins were shouting about Hagrid. They should fire him straightway, said Pansy Parkinson, who was in tears. It was Malfoy's fault, snapped Dean Thomas. Crabbe and Goyle flexed their muscles, threatening. They all climbed the stone steps and deserted entrance hall. I'm going to see if he's okay, said Pansy. And they all watched her run up to the marble staircase, the Slytherin still muttering about Hagrid, headway into the direction of their dungeon. Common room. Harry, Ron, and Hermione proceeded upstairs to the Gryffindor Tower. Do you think he'll be all right? Hermione said nervously. Of course he will. Madame Pomfrey can mend cuts in about 2 seconds, said Harry, who had been far worse injuries mended magically by the nurse. That was really a bad thing to happen on Hagrid's first class, though, wasn't it? Said Ron, looking worried. Trust Malfoy to mess things up for him. They were among the first to reach the Crest Hall at dinner time, hoping to see Hagrid, but he wasn't there. Oh, they wouldn't fire him, would they? Said Hermione anxiously, not touching his steak and kidney pudding. Oh, they better not, said Ron, who wasn't eating either. Harry was watching the Slytherin table. A large group of, including Crabbe and Goyle, were huddled together, deep in conversation. Harry was sure they were cooking up their own version of how Malfoy had been injured. Well, you can't say it wasn't an interesting first day back, said Ron gloomily. They went up to the crowded Gryffindor common room after dinner, and they tried to do their homework. Professor McGonagall had given them all three of them kept breaking off and glancing out the tower window. There was a light on in Hagrid's window, Harry said suddenly. Ron looked up. If we hurried, we could go down there to see him. It's still quite early. I don't know, Hermione said slowly. He saw Harry, and she saw her glance at him. I'm allowed to walk across the ground, he said pointedly. Sirius Black hasn't passed the Dementors yet here, has he? So they put their things away and headed out to the portrait hole, glad not to meet anybody on their way out to the doors. They weren't entirely sure they were supposed to be out. The grass was still wet and almost looked black in the twilight. When they reached Hagrid's hut, they knocked. Come in, he growled. Hagrid was sitting in his shirt sleeves with a scrubbed wooden table and his boarhound Fang in his head of Hagrid's lap. One look told him Hagrid had been drinking a lot, and there was a pewter tankard almost as big as a bucket in front of him. There seemed to be driving difficulty getting them into focus. Spect it's a record, he said thickly, and recognized. Don't know, reckon I've had a teacher who has lasted one day before. You haven't been fired, Hagrid, gasped Hermione. Not yet, Hagrid said miserably, taking a huge gulp of whatever it was he was in the tankard. But it's only a matter of time, isn't it? After Malfoy. How is he? Said Ron. They all sat down. Oh, it wasn't serious, was it? Madame Pomfrey fixed him up the best she could, said Hagrid dully. But he's saying he's still in agony, covered in bandages, moaning. He's faking it, said Harry at once. Madame Pomfrey can mend anything. She regrew half my bones last year. Trust Malfoy to milk it for all it's worth. School governors have been told, of course, Hagrid said miserably. They reckon I started too big. Should have had hippogriffs for later. Don't know, flubberworms or something. Just thought it'd make a good first lesson. It's all my fault. It's Malfoy's fault, Hagrid, said Hermione earnestly. We're witnesses, said Harry. Your hit said the hippogriff attacked you if you insult them. It's Malfoy's problem that he wasn't listening. We'll tell Dumbledore what really happened. Yeah, don't worry, Harry, Hagrid. We'll back you up, said Ron. Tears leaked out of the crinkled corners of Hagrid's beetle-like black eyes. He grabbed both Harry and Ron and pulled them into a bone-breaking hug. I think they've had enough to drink, Hagrid. I think you've had enough to drink, Hagrid, said Hermione firmly. She took the tankard from the table and put it outside to empty it. Maybe she's right, said Hagrid, letting go of Harry and Ron. They both staggered away, rubbing their ribs. Hagrid heaved himself out of the chair and followed Hermione unsteadily outside. They heard a loud splash. What's he done? Said Harry nervously, as Hermione came back in with the empty tankard. Stuck his head in the water barrel, said Hermione, putting the tankard away. Harry came back out with his long hair and beard were sopping wet, wiping the water out of his eyes. That's better, he said, shaking his head like a dog, drenching them all. Listen, it was good of you to come see me. I really... Hagrid stopped dead, staring at Harry as though he'd just realized what he was there. What do you think you're doing, eh? He roared, so suddenly that they jumped up. You're not to wander round after dark, Harry. And you too, letting him. Hagrid strode off and grabbed Harry by his arm and pulled him to the door. Come on, Hagrid said angrily. I'm taking you all back up to the school, and don't let me catch you walking down here again after dark. I'm not worth that.